Welcome to the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast. I'm Mike Waters. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by former Syracuse basketball player Danny Schayes. Schayes holds the record for the longest NBA career by a former Syracuse player after spending 18 seasons in the league. I talked with Danny about his Hall of Fame father, Dolph, how Rick Pitino didn't think he was good enough to play at Syracuse, and his self-admitted status as a Star Trek nerd. Danny, how are you, sir?
I am doing great. It's a beautiful day. SU's coming off a win. We're getting near the good time of the season. What's not to like?
There you go. Absolutely. There's so many things I want to talk to you about, and I've got a list. But before we go, even get started, I'm noticing your background there, Danny, and the big golden basketball trophy just stands out. I have got to ask you about it. What's that trophy commemorate?
Well, in today's Zoom world, of course, you can't just sit in your office with that fake background behind your head. So you got to set up like a TV set. So when I was doing, the sports shows for Syracuse ESPN, we had a little set. Got a few basketball memorabilia things here that we can kind of go over. So, but this one here is one of my favorites. As you know, my dad played in the NBA for a long time, was a 12-time All-Star. And this is actually his trophy from the year I was born, 59-60. So this is an official All-Star trophy from that year. And he was an All-Star 12 years out of his 16. And that's only because they didn't have the All-Star game until his third year in the league. Otherwise, he would have been a 15-time All-Star. But so that's that one. And there's a few other cute things around that we can talk about.
Okay, well, we'll pick apart the background as we go. We'll intersperse some background questions in between the basketball ones. But you know what? That trophy's so cool. You mentioned your dad, Dolph. He's a former Syracuse Nat and a NBA Hall of Famer. I always wondered, when you were growing up in the Syracuse area,
right?
What was it like, being the son of the famous Dolph Schayes, the former Nat?
Well, at that time, of course, the Nats were still a quasi-current part of the history, right? I mean, they left in '64, and when I was growing up in the late '60s, '70s, I graduated high school '77. People around town still remembered the Nats. Now it's 50 years ago, so it's more of a thing, in history. But back then, it was very, very current. My dad was still young in his 40s and 50s, and very popular in town. So that was, the good news was, I got to enjoy that part of it. Syracuse was not an NBA city, so there wasn't this kind of overwhelming sense of pressure. Plus, I had an older brother who got all that part of the pressure. Yeah. So a quick funny side story is the flip side, of course, is that everything I heard growing up is, you're trying to tell me how great my father was. They'd say, oh, you'll never be as good as your father. He was so good. He was this and he was that. So we had this kind of little running joke, although, I realized that there was a program around that, like that you take in when you're a little kid that, oh, you'll never be as good as him. He's the greatest. And so as my career went along, he had a very long career, especially for his era, played 16 years and 1,059 games, which were both NBA records at that time, along with several others that he held. Wow. And the morning of my 1,060th game, I called him on the phone. And I said, Dad, guess what? Today's my 1,060th game. One more, I didn't have to add the one more than you part. So he kind of got this smirky sound on his voice. He goes, oh, you're passing the old man, huh? And so I couldn't tell if he was happy for me or a little annoyed. But at the end of the day, he and my mom got together and presented me with this commemorative clock.
Oh, wow.
For my 1,060th NBA game. And actually, if you see the basketball in the background there, that's the game ball from my 1,060th game. I was with the Magic at the time, and their longtime PR guy, Joel Glass, we were talking about it, and he snuck the ball away and had it put together for me as a presentation, as kind of a congratulations thing. So there you go. So at the end of the day, cool. A couple other pieces of interesting background.
That's really neat. Wow. Now, so you grow up in the area. I know you went to Jamesville DeWitt High School. Given that your dad was kind of still a famous basketball name in town, did you ever think about maybe not going to Syracuse and going someplace where maybe you wouldn't be in Dolph Schayes' shadow?
Actually, because I mean, he didn't go to Syracuse University, of course. He went to NYU, New York University. So that was a semi, kind of six of one, half dozen of the other kind of issues.
Okay.
Actually, my last three was Syracuse, Princeton, and Wake Forest. Princeton had the great coach Pete Carrill at the time. Wake Forest, up and coming ACC team. And when I went down for my Wake Forest trip, I was convinced that's where I was going to sign. I love the school, the program. Would have been a starter in the ACC as a freshman. Mike Jaminski was the big stud at Duke at the time.
Yeah.
And when I came back here and kind of thought things through, I realized years later that the reason I signed at Syracuse is I had something to prove. People didn't think I was good enough to play here. Of course, Roosevelt being the star center at the time. And, at the end of the day, I still ended up with the longest career of any NBA career of any player ever from Syracuse. And so it worked out pretty good.
You mentioned that some people didn't think you'd be able to play at Syracuse or you weren't good enough. I heard that. Tell me if I'm wrong. Rick Pitino was part of that crowd.
He was, and Rick was actually one of the, probably the lead trumpet player of that crowd. And and ironically, when Rick left to go to Boston University at the time, he was making several not so subtle hints that I would be a great addition to that team when he went. But Rick was an incredible force here as a coach. Obviously, what he's done since. But is young and raw and excited and energetic. A lot to learn from him. It was interesting to have him as part of my coach's pedigree, which is long and illustrious. But yeah, so I realized that there was that kind of subconscious element of something to prove. And at the end of the day, I'm about to get my name in the paper again because kudos to Carmelo Anthony, who I think might catch me. I think he's on year 17 right now. And so if he resigns next year, I think I'll get my name in the paper as he passes me up. It'll be an exciting time. Good for him.
I'll be sure to get your name not only in the paper but in the headline. Okay.
There you go.
Now you mentioned another fella there earlier, Roosevelt Bowie. Roosevelt, obviously outstanding center. He was 1 year ahead of you.
Right.
A two-part question. Why did you come to Syracuse with a guy like Roosevelt 1 year ahead of you? And then did you think about redshirting when you did to maybe give another year of separation between you two?
I did. Let's go back. So second question first. Yes, I did. I even talked to Coach Boeheim about for the possibility of redshirting. And actually the reason I came here ultimately, as far as like why the fit, was that at the time, you remember Kentucky had the Twin Towers of Rick Roby and Phillips there, and we were going to implement a Twin Towers type of offense and play here. Wow. And so that was the idea. You had obviously Dale Shackelford as a junior, Marty Burns senior. So we had a lot of opportunities. Those guys were going to be, kind of stepping away, and it was Lewis Orr would have moved to the 3, Roosevelt and I 4 and 5, and implement that kind of system. And that was really the thinking behind it, not just to come in to be a backup center. And so we talked about redshirting, and coach was like, "There's no reason to." I mean, I was certainly college ready, and he wanted that on the team. We tried it several times, and I think it might have worked too good. It didn't catch on, as obviously he didn't do it as a regular thing, unfortunately, as it turned out. But I thought it was really effective. Roosevelt and I going high-low, and obviously dominant defensively and on the boards with Lewis on the other wing, who had such great instincts. So for whatever reason, like I said, it didn't become a kind of a regular feature, but that was the thinking behind it.
All right, we're going to step away from the basketball questions to go back to this amazing background. Is that a Danny Schayes Denver Nuggets doll on a shelf?
It is, and the irony. So I've got a Denver Nuggets style here. I do have to do this.
Okay.
Sorry to mess it up for you, but
it's life size.
So yes, this was presented to me when I was in Denver, and I go, "Wow, I didn't know I looked that much like Donny Osmond." And, so I wasn't sure if it was a Donny Osmond doll with my jersey or a me doll that I just looked like Donny Osmond, but I thought that was pretty funny. It's actually This is one of my favorite bits of memorabilia, and that was done by a great fan. And so it gets its position of prominence right there in the middle of the shot.
Well, it's a Denver dub. You did play for the Utah Jazz for a while, so the whole Donny Osmond connection there,
Exactly. And again, is another funny side story. There was a time where they actually did basketball figures, action figures. And so they all came out, and they came and took everyone's picture and made them. And then when they sent me a couple of them at the end, as they send to everybody. And I got mine, and it had the same thing, that Nuggets jersey in the white. And I go, sorry, hold on, go away. And
we're very informal.
The joys of technology.
That's it.
The old school gets in the way sometimes. The phone actually rings. Wow, who thought of that? Anyway, so I get mine, and I go, why do I look like John Koncak? And for some reason, it looked, kind of sandy hair, not dark. And it just, I kind of got a laugh out of it the whole time. And then years later, I was at an All-Star weekend, and they had some of the sponsor people. And I actually met the guy who was in charge of that for the NBA. And he actually did tell me they ran out of Danny Schayes heads, and they did put John Koncak's head on my doll. So somewhere out there, there's Danny Schayes action figures with John Koncak's head on it. So I'll tell you, I'm like Rodney Dangerfield here. Rodney Dangerfield here. I get no respect.
I got a new mission in life. I'm going to hit every collector store I can find.
So you find one of those?
Yeah. That would be fantastic. Your senior year, you had a great year. After 3 years of being behind Roosevelt, you made first team All Big East, led the team in scoring and rebounding, but it was also the first year of the Carrier Dome.
Right.
What was that like for you guys to move into that building after moving out of Manly, which was such a tight, cramped, incredible home court advantage, to moving to this spacious, cavernous football stadium?
Well, it was two of the great home courts in college basketball history, and to get to play in both of them was a real thrill. Man, I actually grew up obviously going to Manly Fieldhouse when it still had the dirt floor and the elevated, the dirt floor in the building, and then the elevated court, right, with the bleachers all the way around. And so I go through, all the way back to Roy's Runts and before. So that that was still friends with Jimmy and Mike Lee. Those are guys I used to play pickup ball with when I was in freshman in high school. And that era guy is where I really got introduced to the program. So moving into the Dome, actually we had all the bugs worked out. I lived in Lawrence and Durham, which was the tall high rise right across the street. So I got to enjoy Archibald Stadium as a freshman, and then a sophomore. Then they tore it down, of course, junior year, and we were without a home for that year while they were building the Dome. So I got to see it all in action. And then but once the Dome opened, we started to practice there, and we found out it was too expensive to turn the heat on. So their solution was to give everybody warm-up suits. So we practiced with these heavy sweatsuits, and then they get sweaty, they weigh 50 pounds. So then when it got really cold in the winter, they didn't turn the heat up past, I think, 50, just to keep the pipes from freezing. So then they brought these giant space heaters, and they ring the court with space heaters. And how when it's cold like that, you can see the heat beams coming out, right? So they come about the 3 feet and then straight up in the air. They didn't make it anywhere near the court. So the only guys warm was the coaches, because Boeheim would stand right underneath the damn heater like this the whole practice, and wouldn't move because it was freezing there. You could see your breath when you're playing. And so we did that until it got really cold. Then they said, let's go back to Manly and practice. So we ended up practicing back at Manly and then just playing games there. But the really cool part was, as the thing caught on, I think our opening game was 11, 12,000. It wasn't, it was bigger than Manly, but it wasn't, what we're used to. Mm-hmm. And as the season went along, the crowd started getting into it, right? Because you remember, if you were in growing up in Syracuse, you knew you couldn't get in the gym because it only sat 9,000 at Manly.
Right.
And then more and more people who were casual fans or just I don't go to game fans now realize they can get tickets and they can come to the games. So the crowds built over the season and went up and up little by little by little by little. and finally got to where we were close to breaking Rupp Arena's record of, I think it's 23,000 and change for the largest on-campus crowd to watch a college game. And when we finally broke it, and I mean the gym was electric. It was 20. I forget the exact number, 23 high 23,000s, and which was mind-boggling for that era. And then we had the Big East tournament. You'll remember at home at that time, the Big East tournament at home, and then that year we ended up at the NIT and played NIT games at home. So it actually we really got to enjoy the arena a lot that year.
That's really cool. And then so that's the end of your senior year. Did you think you were going to be a first round draft pick? Because you end up going number 13 in that year's NBA draft.
Right.
But did you know where you were? I don't know how how certain things were back in those days in terms of, your draft position.
Again, the scouting was very, very different than today. I don't even know how I was scouted. I don't remember people saying, oh, the Bulls have a guy here, who has whatever. I never heard of a pro scout being at the game. If you remember, it was a little bit up and down year for us. Rosie and Lewis graduated the year before. Much of our team offense, graduated that year before. So we were kind of having a rebuilding year and really peaked at the end of the year. We kind of were a 500 team through 3/4 of the year and then really turned it on at the end. We really gelled. So I had heard just kind of rumory that I was probably second, third round, somewhere in there. Again, not nothing definitive. I didn't talk to agents, or there weren't that kind of chatter that you hear today, where it's they got draft boards from 10th grade,
right,
and up. And so the real key for me was I got invited to the Aloha Classic, which at the time was the biggest, most prestigious senior all-star weekend after the year. So it was out in Hawaii, and just as a coincidence, Jim Boeheim was the Eastern coach. And so I think that had a lot to do with me being included on the roster. And it was me and Wayne McCoy, the St. John's center, at the manning the big spot. We had guys like Sleepy Floyd and one of the guards, a lot of guys you never heard of who were pretty good players. Franklin Edwards, Cleveland State.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Harvey Knuckles was on that team. But we were by far the underdog. The thing was loaded. You had Kelly Tripucka playing on one of the teams, Darnell Valentine, the great Kansas guard. You had Danny Vrains and Tom Chambers. There was a bunch of really, really good players. And our division, the Eastern group, was considered by far the weakest. And I won't go into all the details, but we ended up winning the tournament on a last-second missed layup in another game that evened out all the standings. Then we ended up winning the thing in tiebreakers because people took us lightly and we ended up playing really well together. I was on the all-tournament team. And then in that weekend went from another guy to, a second center chosen in the draft. But the level of scouting is nothing like you have today. Today every game's on TV. Every game they got scouting services that break down all the, the game stats from every, how many pick and rolls, how many shots from different angles, what spots, how far you run on the court, and how fast you move from here to there. All those metrics didn't exist in our era. There was a couple of scouting services that put out reports, and teams bought them and they flipped a coin. I did go on some pro visits. Teams that were interested in me. Turned out I got drafted by the Jazz, who I'd had zero contact with before the draft. Was completely out of the blue. And the team that wanted me the most was Portland. Jack Ramsey was the coach there, and he loved my style of play for what they did. They picked a couple of picks behind the Jazz, so I didn't end up there. But I remember I was sitting with Kelly Tripucka at the draft, and of course Kelly was from New Jersey, wanted to go to the Nets in the worst way, and those picks were all bunched together. It was I may get the numbers off by 1 or 2, but I think the Nets were either at 10, Detroit at 11, somebody at 12, Indiana, I think, and then Utah at 13. Mm-hmm. And so Kelly was on the edge of his seat, was so excited, thinking he was going to go to the Nets as the hometown kid. They ended up picking Albert King, Bernard's younger brother, also local kid. Kelly was crushed, and while he was sitting there sulking, Detroit picked him with the next pick, and same kind of thing, completely out of the blue. He had no idea. He was, just in a complete free fall at that point, like, oh my God, what happened? Because he was so, locked in. And then Herb Williams went to Indiana, and then I went to the Jazz next, and it was like, really? Okay. So or I forget if Indiana might have been one pick behind. I forget one way or the other. So I did the interview. Hot Rod Hundley's on the radio. I'm talking to some guy on the phone with a Utah Jazz hat, and that was it. I was an NBA guy.
All right, so we're going to step away from basketball again to come back into your set there. Who's our feline friend walking around in front of you?
Yeah, so that's Diamond. He's my son's a baseball player and basketball, so we named him Diamond. He's my buddy. So he's my wife is we call her the crazy cat lady. We have 5 cats, and they're awesome. I'm a dog guy myself, but she's converted me. So Diamond was wandering around saying hello to everybody, and there's you may get an appearance here. Here comes our kitten Smokey, who's our youngest. I don't know if he'll make a camera appearance, but we shall see.
5 of them. Wow, it's like you got to name them after 5 Syracuse players, and you'd get a starting 5.
Yeah, one of them is Who Cares? The other one's So What?
Hey!
The third one's Big Deal.
We don't want to get to the last one. We can't do that well, maybe we can on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of names, are you actually named after Danny Schayes, who was the owner of the Nats?
I am, and the creator of the 24-second clock. He was a great family friend. My dad and he were very, very close. My dad jokes that he tried to get a raise, so he named me after him. But he said it didn't work.
It didn't work.
It didn't work. Well, again, my dad was had a great sense of humor. But it was amazing. I got to grow up, and there was actually I want to say I was maybe 13 or 14. There was a preseason game in Buffalo, and my dad wanted to go, so he called Danny up, and me and a buddy jumped in the back seat of the car, and my dad and Danny Schayes in the front seat drove to Buffalo for the game, and they told old NBA war stories for 2 hours, and we just were flies on the wall in the back seat, talking about how the 24-second clock was invented, how they came up with 24, just different things, how the teams were formed, and why they ended up. You may or may not know, when the league expanded west, they actually offered Syracuse the first choice of LA or San Francisco, and Danny didn't want to move, so he ended up passing. And then the Philadelphia Warriors obviously picked San Francisco, and Syracuse moved to Philly, became the 76ers. But we were talking about like that, how could have been the San Francisco Nationals. Who knows? It's that
would have been amazing. I got to meet Danny Schayes when I moved to town in January of '89. Obviously he was, advanced age then, but I did get a chance to meet him on a couple of occasions. And I interviewed him one time at the old Eastwood Sports Center, the bowling alley.
Right.
And I can still remember, we chatted over lunch, and I had a beef stroganoff. and just like you in the car on your way to Buffalo, I just sat and listened to NBA tales. It was amazing.
Well, Danny was so old world Italian, very elegant and, mannerly and all that, just, great sense of humor. But what was so interesting about that, in today's day, everyone has related entities, right? If you own the team, you may own the arena, you own the TV network, and you have a business, whether it's, Mickey Arison with cruise lines or, whatever it is. And of course, back in that era, I show you how we talk about in the old days. By the way, that's Spencer saying hello in the background there.
Hi, Spencer.
In the old days, the related entity was a bowling alley and a snack bar. That's what it took to own an NBA team back in the day, right? It wasn't you needed this massive, enterprise behind you. But Danny was always just, such a loving guy. The biggest shame, in his life is that he was inducted into the Hall of Fame after he passed away posthumously. Yeah. And never put him in. And you talk about, and it always burned my dad, because, Danny was, and the way he tells it, my dad tells it, it was a personality thing with somebody high at the Hall that Danny had pissed him off, and so he wasn't going to let him in while he was alive. It was a FU thing. But the invention of the 24-second clock was maybe the greatest innovation in sports across the board. Saved the NBA, saved basketball. The NBA in the mid 50s was floundering, and the game was slow and boring. Mm-hmm. There were 2 rules that really screwed it up. One is there was a 1-shot foul, right? If it was non-shooting foul, it was 1 free throw. You didn't take the ball on the side. And then, of course, there was no shot clock. So if you're up by 10 at half, you would go what the equivalent of the four corners. You'd stall. They make you foul. You go. So the defense, they would foul. They get one shot, and we get the ball to maybe get two to catch up. And so then they just foul you back. So you couldn't get two. So it became a free throw contest. Nice. And the game's really ground to a halt. And at the end of the day, what really was the straw that broke the 24-second clock's back, or the other way around, made it possible. There was a famous Minneapolis game ended 1917, and that became too much. So when Danny came up with the concept of the clock, he took the average number of shots in a game divided by 48 minutes, came up with 24 seconds. And that way, when he sold it, he said, look, if everyone takes 24 seconds a time, the nature of the game won't change. Same number of shots, same pace, but this way you'll just be forced to shoot. They did an exhibition game, as you know, in Syracuse.
In Syracuse, yeah.
And it was so like immediately obvious what a great rule it was adopted literally on the spot. And the rest is history. Now you can't imagine a game without a shot clock. Like even now, if I'll go to a high school game without a shot clock, I'm like grinding my teeth. I'm like, oh, where's the shot clock? We got a shot clock. Game sucks without a shot clock. And to have like I said, an innovation that impactful, and have him not get to be honored for it really was a shame. Because I mean, an awesome guy, and like I said, a great basketball mind.
Okay, we got to go to the background. One more before we end the podcast here.
Sure.
This whole thing has been observed by Dr. Spock or Mr. Spock. What is the deal with Spock back there, Danny?
Well, I'm an original series fan, clearly, as a matter of fact. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's the 55th anniversary. They just came out with the commemorative thing there. So I'm a big original series fan, well known. My brother and I, as kids,
really
used to watch the show. Imagine it's the late 60s. And we lived in Buffalo at the time. My dad coached the NBA Buffalo Braves, the team that's now the Clippers. And it had just gone into reruns from into syndication. And so we could catch it at 3:00 on the Buffalo channel and 4:00 on the Toronto channel. We could still get the signal. And so my brother and I used to sit in front of the TV, obviously no VCRs in the day. Right. And the episode would start and we'd race to see who could get the episode first. Oh, that's the one where Scotty beams down and does the thing with the, and we'd laugh and go back and forth. So my son was out on a road trip, and they were literally at a gas station in New Mexico, and he saw this great Mr. Spock. It's actually a cookie jar, believe it or not. And so he goes, oh, I got to get that first. So that's my Father's Day gift, is my Mr. Spock cookie jar. And I was much more a Spock guy than even a Captain Kirk guy. Scientific mind. I really identified with Spock as my guy.
Scientific mind. So everybody out there understands what Danny's talking about. I read this. You majored in chemistry at SU.
I did. Yes. As a matter of fact,
probably the last basketball player to major in chemistry.
My mentor, a little props to Dr. Nagishi. My mentor won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And but for the NBA, I would have been a PhD chemist right now, and maybe a Nobel Prize winner. Because I would have. He and I were very close, and I actually was his assistant. And he wanted me. He left and took over the graduate department at Purdue, which is a powerhouse in chemistry, and he wanted me to come to be his personal guy. To help in running that program and get my PhD there. And the NBA called, and I zigged instead of zagged. So who knows? I could be Nobel Prize winner today if I.
Oh my God!
Not been drafted highly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I did not know that. I didn't. Yeah. Okay, I got to ask you before we sign off. Here's a quiz. You played 18 years in the NBA. You played for 7 teams.
Right.
Can you name them all?
Sure, and I have a follow-up for you.
Oh no.
So Utah Jazz for a year and a half, got traded to Denver, which is a funny story. We'll do in our next episode. 7.5 in Denver. Then that team rebuilt, we got sent up to Milwaukee for 3.5. Got traded to LA as a salary cap deal. That's 4. And a salary cap deal for a salary slot. Another for the second episode. And I was there 3 weeks. We had 3 head coaches. Randy Funn got fired 2 weeks into it. Then we had Bill Burtka took over. And then Magic came for the last 16 games, if you remember that year.
Yeah.
93, 94. Finished that up, went to Phoenix for a year, Miami for Pat Riley's first year. last 3 in Orlando with the Magic. At that point, the great Chuck Daly was in the 3rd year of a 5-year deal, and he was going to keep me on there, but he had back problems, and he retired. So I wanted to get to 20, and Chuck would have kept me because we had a great relationship, and I was still playing really good. So unfortunately, he retired in the middle of his contract. The team got broken up. Penny Hardaway got sent to Phoenix. Horace Grant went to Seattle, I think it was. And I then got picked up as the TV broadcaster for the Seattle Sonics, living in Orlando, commuting to Seattle for games.
Oh,
another story.
God.
And during that preseason, we ended up playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, and their center, Dean Garrett, had knee surgery. So they signed me. I actually got signed by Minnesota for Team 8, and went in there, had a great preseason. Season got ready to start, and they wanted to see if Dean was healthy, so they had me on the infamous injured list for the first 2 weeks of the season. And then the team went on like a 6-game losing streak, and the owner panicked and said, get rid of everybody who's not on the starting, who's not like currently on the roster. So I never actually played a regular season game with Minnesota. So it only half counts.
Okay.
So also for part 2 of our podcast series. So in my NBA time, I also played in 18 years for 15 head coaches. And I had won Doug Moe for 8 of those years. So that means in the other 10 years, I had 14 different head coaches.
Oh my God.
In 10 years, including the aforementioned 3 in 2 weeks.
3 in LA. Yeah.
In LA. But of that group, so my entire career as a player, 7 coaches in the Basketball Hall of Fame, including my dad, Jim Boeheim, and Rick Pitino. Wow. And then Chuck Daly, Pat Riley, Magic, and I forget who the other one is. It'll come to me in a second. 7 who are NBA Coaches of the Year. Certainly Jim Boeheim, and Pitino. They're, the college, whatever they got award. So pretty good basketball background.
Yeah, you had it good. Well, this has been not beyond good. This has been great. Oh my God. The time is flying by. So we're going to have to let you go and say goodbye. And yes, we're going to have you on again so we can explore some more of these other stories that obviously you've got there. Danny, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for coming by.
Absolutely, Mike. Great to be on.